we were told by our superiors that we would probably suffer about 50% casualties in our unit. But I was also a young father, and we had 2 young boys. So I started thinking to myself, if I don't come back, what can I leave for my sons that give them an idea of how to lead their life? So on a daily basis, I would write in a journal some thoughts about everything from emotions to friendship to love to religion. So I would pick a topic a day and write about it. When I started as a second lieutenant, I had a 19 soldier tank platoon. By the time I ended my career, when I was in my final job as commander of U.S. Army Europe, there were 90,000 soldiers in about 15 very large organizations, and I was dealing with the armies and the governments of 49 different nations in Europe. And it was just a very unique opportunity for a poor kid from Missouri.
Hi, let's welcome my guest Mark Hertling, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General, professor at Kramer Graduate School of Business, speaker, and author. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
Hey, Danny, it's great to see you, and I'm happy to be on the show with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining. Let's talk about your story. How did you decide to join the Army in the first place, and did you ever think that you'll become a 3-star general?
Absolutely not. I had no ambition to be a 3-star general, but truthfully, I got into the Army. I was a high school senior at the time and came from kind of a lower income family and didn't have a whole lot of money to afford college. And one of my guidance counselors suggested the military academy at West Point. He told me all about it. I applied and got in, not knowing what it was getting into. I mean, he actually said, hey, this is a place where you get a free education for 4 years, and all you have to do is serve for 5 years afterwards in the military. This was 1971. Vietnam War was still going on, so not a whole lot of people wanted to take advantage of something like that. So I went to the military academy, found just a real sense of adventure. It was the first time I had ever left my hometown, going to New York and going to school there and being sent around the world on different academic ventures. And then later, after graduating and being commissioned from the academy, my first assignment was in Germany. And I just truthfully fell in love with the soldiers and the adventure and the kinds of things we were being asked to do. There was always a renewed sense of challenges in every position you held. You had to learn new things and go different places. And toward the end of my career, I was getting promoted and rising to the ranks of 3 stars. And it was just a very unique opportunity for a poor kid from Missouri to see the world and to experience the many people that I was able to meet, the literally thousands of people that I came in contact with and served with. The interesting thing about it, you look back over that long period of time and it goes by in a flash. This is one thing that I'm kind of proud of. I had never left the city of St. Louis, Missouri, until I went off to West Point in 1971. And since then, I've had the opportunity to visit 123 different countries. I met all sorts of different people, experienced culture that was not our own, and just had unique challenges in every role.
And what about your leadership philosophy? Did it change or evolve over the years? What was your story with your leadership evolution?
I had a pretty good background because of the high school I went to. It focused on the liberal arts and leadership. It's called Christian Brothers College High School in St. Louis. And at the time, it was a military school as well, junior ROTC. So an opportunity to learn the basics of leadership in the schoolhouse. That was certainly reinforced at the military academy at West Point in terms of the educational aspects of learning about leadership. But at the same time, at the military academy, there is a requirement and a challenge to start leading in different positions, both during the academic year and during the summers when there was military training going on. So we were taking a whole lot of courses during the academic year and certainly put into positions of class leadership. But during the summer, we were challenged with military activities and training to become an officer. Then passing into the military itself, of course, as a brand new second lieutenant first, going to Germany at the time, the wall was still up between East and West Germany. So we would do border patrols and have different operations. I was a tanker and I had, 19 soldiers in my tank platoon. And each one is an opportunity to exhibit leadership as well as the team building and the requirements of a unit in the military. So as you go through the military ranks at each level, the number of people you're assigned to lead, the challenges that are associated with the job responsibilities, the combined efforts of different organizations as you proceed up the chain of command. At each level, you're giving more and more challenges and more leadership opportunities to show how you interact with others and how you perform in terms of both your attributes and your competencies. There's actually a leadership manual in the Army. It's called Field Manual, or now it's called ADRP 6-22, and it's all about leadership. So the way you apply the tenets and the factors found in that manual are critically important for your growth.
And one of the topics that I love to discuss on this podcast is how military members transition out of the military. And there are countless stories of different people adapting to the civilian world. What was your story transitioning out of the military as a senior officer, as a three-star general? Any challenges, anything that you've learned along the way in this process?
Yeah, it's interesting because leaving the military, which I did in 2013, you feel like you've spent your entire life in the Army, in my case. And it's a family. They have a specific set of values. It has all the elements of a profession, the profession of arms. So there's an ethos and a sense of values as well as a requirement for continued training. And when you transition out from a profession into the private sector, you're mostly going to the business community. Unless you're a professional like a chaplain or a doctor or a lawyer, you would transition to another profession. But I was offered a job. In fact, I was recruited to go to a position in a healthcare system here in Orlando, where I currently live, because they had a new initiative and they wanted a unique kind of person to run this new initiative in this healthcare system. And the initiative had to do with global partnering with other nations. So, what I found very quickly was that I could certainly apply my knowledge of the world and different cultures and how people worked with the requirement for expanding an initiative to get more people interested, because that's sort of what you do in the military. I mean, you have to influence people, you have to look at a world view, you have to understand individuals' personalities and how you speak with them and connect. So it was a whole lot of fun when I first started doing the job they hired me for. But then, Danny, what happened is the chief medical officer of this system approached me and said that they had been trying to develop a program for their physicians and their nurses and their administrators to teach leadership. And they had hired a bunch of people to come in from different, universities and consulting firms to teach leadership, and they were never really accepted. So he asked me if I wanted to take a shot at teaching leadership to doctors and nurses. And I said I'd give it a chance. So I put together a program, and we started it in 2014, graduated 50 people that first year. And what we saw just by teaching leadership to members of the healthcare profession, doctors, nurses, and administrators, who the research shows have a very unique tension between each other, what we started seeing was a change in the culture based on the objectives we had for this course. So over the next 8 years with that organization, I continued to teach this leadership class, each one having 50 people in it. And during that time, the healthcare organization asked me to write a book. This was in 2016, I believe. And then the name of that book was Growing Physician Leaders. And it became an Amazon bestseller in the healthcare genre. So a lot of people picked it up, and I started to get asked to go to other healthcare systems to teach their doctors and nurses. And in fact, I'm going to a facility in Virginia that just asked me to start the program there tomorrow. So it's just a dynamic of teaching the basics and the foundational elements of leadership to those who might otherwise not get it in their formal training as they study the science of medicine. What this course tries to impart is the art of leadership. And so that's kind of my story getting into the private sector. It was not a difficult transition, truthfully. I had a lot of people who reached out to me and said, who were also retired general officers, who basically said, "Hey, uh, what are you looking to do? What kind of things can we help you with? Let me give you some advice. I had 3 or 4 individuals who literally reached out to me from previous career opportunities where I'd served with them. And they really gave me the ins and outs of how to transition from the military into the private sector. So it worked pretty well, but it really had to do with 2 things: the kinds of things you learn throughout a career in the military or sometimes very applicable to a civilian situation. But also, I got a whole lot of help from some caring individuals who were mentors and teammates in the past, and they helped walk me through that early transition. So it was smooth. And what I found was that I found another family in healthcare. And now I've got another family in the academic environment where I'm teaching at a business school. Things have been very blessed in terms of contributing to the world.
And was it something that you've always enjoyed teaching and sharing knowledge with other people, or was it something new that you found out about yourself once you were out of the military?
What you find in any leadership role, there is a requirement to teach and train and coach and mentor and even provide critiques to your subordinates to help build them into a better team that you're leading. So, what I found as I entered into the private sector is I had been doing that teaching and training through my entire career. And it was an easy transition to, instead of just teaching teams that were in tank crews or companies or battalions or brigades, it was just as easy to teach in the classroom and provide some insight into what makes a good leader based on that manual I was talking about a minute ago, that Army field manual, but also the experiences that I've had in leading different organizations, both in unique situations, but also the size of the organizations. When I started in my as a second lieutenant, I mentioned I had a 19 soldier tank platoon. By the time I ended my career, when I was in my final job as commander of U.S. Army Europe, there were 90,000 soldiers in about 15 very large organizations, and I was dealing with the armies and the governments of 49 different nations in Europe. So as you see, you transition in each level of your job from having that small team of 19 all the way up to a large multinational organization with soldiers spread all over the place and a whole lot of challenges across the continent of Europe.
And let's talk about your new book that is coming out, I believe, end of February, early March, 2026. What led you to write this book, and what is it all about?
Well, it's a great story, and I'm glad you asked because the name of the book is If I Don't Return, A Father's Wartime Journal. The first time I went to combat was Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm in 1990 and 1991. And I know looking back on the history of that war, people will say, oh, well, that was the very quick 4-day war and we didn't have that many casualties. Going into that conflict, when we were alerted and were preparing to deploy to Saudi Arabia and then later into Iraq, we were told that we were going up against the Iraqi army. They were at the time the 4th largest in the world. They had just participated in an 8-year war against Iran. So they were battle hardened and we weren't. They also had chemical weapons at the time. Saddam Hussein had used those chemical weapons against the Kurds in northern Iraq. So we were really mindful of how difficult that situation was going to be. I was with a cavalry squadron at the time, which means I was part of a unit that was out in front of a division of 20,000 soldiers. And our job was to find the enemy when we conducted the attack into Iraq and to pass them on to the tank brigades and battalions. So that was our mission. And in thinking of the mission and thinking of the challenges, we were also told by our superiors that we would probably suffer about 50% casualties in our unit. So that puts a little bit of anxiety and fear into you. But I was also a young father, and we had 2 young boys. One was 10 and the other one was 7. So I started thinking to myself, if I don't come back, what can I leave for my sons that give them an idea of how to lead their life? So on a daily basis, before the war started and then after the war was over, after the 4 days we attacked, I would write in a journal some thoughts about everything from emotions to friendship to love to religion. So just I would pick a topic a day and write about it. As I kiddingly say, spoiler alert, I did come home. I wasn't killed. And but our boys were still young, so they had no interest in reading this very thoughtful journal that I had written over a 6 month period of time. So I threw it in a footlocker and forgot all about it. And a couple of years ago, our youngest son asked my wife where the journal was. And what he did is he took it, unbeknownst to me, and typed it up into a Word document. And Christmas of 2024, he presented it to me as a gift. And what he said at the time was, "Hey, Dad, my brother and I know what you were doing in this journal. You were preparing us in case you didn't come home. And now that we're fathers and that we've experienced war, we understand what you were trying to do." And it was a very emotional moment when he gave me this. But then he added to it, he said, "Hey, you've spent 30 years in the military and you've had some years in the private sector since then. Why don't you take this and expand upon it so your grandkids understand the kind of person you were?" So over that year period between December of 24 and December of 25, I kind of ensconced myself in this office and started taking the journal entries and further reflecting on them with the lessons I had learned in the 30 years since I wrote it. So it is a book with the original journal entries from combat in 1991, reinforced with some additional thoughts about those same topics: friendship, love, emotions, combat, intelligence, how to relate to other people, leadership. And that's what the book's about. And I didn't know if it would be published, and I just did it initially for the family, but I sent it off to a publisher asking if he thought it would be worthy of publishing. And he immediately returned to me after reading it overnight. He actually stayed up all night reading it, and he said, "This is a good book, and I think a lot of people would get a lot out of it, especially parents who are trying to teach their children things about life." So that's the book. It's a combination of journal reflections, but also information about the military, which I think is helpful because during my time as an analyst on CNN and now a writer for other organizations about what really happens in the military, we know that 99% of the American public do not serve in uniform. So very few of them have an understanding of what the military does. So this book is not only a reflection of life, but it's also provides information about what the Army does and how it connects to the other services.
Yeah, great. And I'll leave a link to your book in the video description so that anyone's listening, you can go click on that link once you finish the podcast and check out the book. So I want to expand a little bit on what you said about the Desert Storm, Desert Shield. The fact that you knew that there was a 50% chance that you wouldn't return home. How did you process that on an emotional level, knowing that you're going into something and you don't have a choice anymore? You already committed to that and you might not return. You might lose your life or be wounded. How did you make sense of it to yourself as you were preparing for that?
Well, that's really what the book is all about. And it addresses the emotions that you go through. The first one is anxiety. Another one is fear. I mean, everyone has a fear of dying, obviously. Another emotion is how do you generate friendships and camaraderie in a unit where it's not only me, but I'm here with my brothers and sisters in this unit. So we're all in this together and you don't want to disappoint someone else. So that's another emotion. You rely on your training. You know that you're prepared for doing what you do. But the other thing I'd tack on at the end is soldiers understand that is part of the requirement of signing up to serve the nation. There is always that concern that you might have to give your life in that defense. It's the only profession that asks that, where you know that if you're suddenly called by your civilian leaders to go into combat, that there is a possibility that you could be hurt or killed. That is one of the key differentiators of the military profession versus being a lawyer or a doctor or a minister. And you have to take it as part of your requirements. So in knowing that, and then one day being asked to actually deliver on that oath that you've taken to the military to defend the country, it suddenly becomes part of your stark reality that this could be something where I'm really truly being asked to put my life on the line to protect our country, to protect our fellow citizens. All of that goes into the emotional conundrum that everyone faces when they're asked to go to combat. And what was interesting, Danny, is Desert Storm, I was a young major at the time, but that was my first combat experience. So the emotional dynamics were much higher. I went to combat a couple of more times after that, twice more in Iraq, multiple visits to Afghanistan where we were in harm's way. So, and every day literally on the border between East and West Germany, where there was tensions between the freedoms that were associated with the wall and the Iron Curtain, experience more and more of those kinds of situations where you're placed in a crisis. Your anxiety level goes down. You have more of a personal courage to understand what you're being asked to do and how you're being asked to do it. But there's also an understanding that your preparation and your ability to face those kind of fears goes up every time you are put in those kind of positions. It's sort of like building resilience of understanding the situation you're being placed in, whether it's trauma or tragedy or any other kind of stressors, and knowing how to address those things so you stay as calm as you possibly can and keep your wits about you in a crisis. And they're translatable. I mean, as a nation, as a world, we went through the COVID crisis, and there was the same kind of fear and anxiety about possibly dying, but in this case, from an unknown and an unseen disease. So, as I worked with doctors during that period, they were initially very fearful and highly anxious about what the disease might cause, not just to their patients, but to them. But the more and more they experienced the crisis of COVID, they were able to adapt to that and provide the best care possible, which was not the case at the very beginning. There was a lot of very nervous physicians and nurses treating patients. So, in any kind of crisis situation, you adjust and you adapt and you build resilience to face some of your fears.
All right. And before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to give advice for young people, anything that you have in mind, 2026. The world is changing, politics, technology, all of those kinds of things. It's very uncertain. The world is becoming different. So, what's your advice for young people today as we go through this new time period?
Yeah, what I would say my biggest piece of advice from a leadership perspective is you have to learn and grow every day. Find ways to learn something new and determine how it will help your personal and professional growth, whether it's in your family life or in your industry, whatever you happen to work in. The second thing I would say is if you want to really be a great leader, continually conduct self-analysis and self-assessments. Determine your strengths and your weaknesses. Really polish your strengths and try and improve upon your weaknesses so you can represent the best person you can be, both intellectually, emotionally, physically, socially, and try and see where do you stand and ask other people to give you input. Ask other people to provide some information on who they think you are and how you represent yourself. Look for new challenges, overcome your fears of stepping out and taking some risk. The biggest lesson I learned is the more you open yourself to the world and taking on new things and volunteering for things that you might not be sure of that you could do, the more you're going to learn and grow yourself as a leader. And then the last thing I'll say, this is an expression I use every once in a while, and sometimes I even fail in applying it, but it's that leaders don't have the right to have a bad day. So if you are having a bad day, don't let other people know it. Try and figure out how to overcome that bad day. Take a pause, reflect, meditate, pray, take a jog, do whatever you want to overcome that and refresh yourself. But try and always stay in the positive mode because that's what people look for. They look for people who can provide a vision to the future and help in determining how they're going to face life. So that's what leaders do. They provide that security, they provide that vision, and they provide safety. And that's what you have to do as a leader.
Oh, thank you, Mark, for joining and sharing all of these stories. Hope your new book will also be a bestseller, and good luck with that. And I appreciate you coming on the show today.
All right. Thanks, Danny. Thanks for asking me. Good luck to you too.